we are joined by Jasmyne Cannick, journalist and activist, and we're going to talk about the case, or cases actually, involving Ed Buck. Jasmyne, good evening. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you here. I really wanted to talk about this for a while. Just in case our viewers don't know, Ed Buck is a Democratic donor who has been charged with 2 counts of methamphetamine distribution resulting in death. These are federal charges. This is after 2 black men fatally overdosed at his West Hollywood apartment. Now, Jasmyne, I know you've been covering this, the involvement surrounding Ed Buck for a long time. For our viewers, tell us, what's going on.
So Ed Buck is a Democratic donor here in West Hollywood. He was known as this sort of LGBT civil rights, animal rights activist. But he was sort of living 2 lives, and we found out about that first when Jamel Moore died in his apartment of a crystal meth overdose in July of 2017. At the time, the sheriff's department just thought it was another meth overdose because we have a lot of those here in LA County. But we found Jamel Moore's journal, and it detailed very clearly what his relationship with Ed Buck was, including the fact that Ed Buck had gotten him hooked on meth, had given him meth, was forcing him to take meth. And sort of you could see from reading his journal sort of the deterioration, what he was going through. And his mother allowed me to publish that journal. And so when I did that, 19 days later after he died is when the sheriff's department decided to open a homicide investigation. So we have this homicide investigation. It doesn't really go anywhere. But during that time period, I had many other young men come forward to me and allow me to tell their stories about their involvement with Ed Buck. And it was very similar. It was this white man who picked up black gay men, most of the time online using dating apps, but occasionally on the street, like a Santa Monica Boulevard or a Skid Row. And he would target black men who he knew were in need of shelter, money, food. And he would say, look, the more meth you let me shoot into you, the more money I'm gonna give you. And it was case after case after case after case of this. And we started screaming about this. Couldn't get any traction on it, not really with the media, definitely not with the sheriff's department at the time and with the district attorney's office. And then Jackie Lacey, our district attorney, black woman, first black woman in that office here in LA, comes back in July of 2018 and says, you know what? We're not gonna press any charges against Ed Buck. And then 6 months later, Timothy Dean dies in Ed Buck's apartment of the exact same causes.
Not even similar circumstances, but the exact same. They're almost identical, right?
Crystal meth overdose. And so now we have 2 bodies, right? And we have about a dozen other young black gay men who have stepped forward as witnesses. And so we start screaming a lot louder. Different detectives were assigned to the case this time because there was some media attention on it. They couldn't really just slide it under the rug. And then what happened quite recently is that there was another young man who went over there and he overdosed, but he did not die. And he managed to let the police, the sheriff's department, know what happened to him. And so, and then also this is really important. So you mentioned in the opener that this was a federal case, and there's a reason for that, because our local district attorney didn't do anything. And so she says her hands were tied because of California laws. So the feds were brought in. And so as of right now, Ed Buck is charged with providing the meth, the drugs that led to the deaths of Jamel and Timothy Dean. It's the exact same charge that Cameron Pettit is charged with in the death of, I don't know why the rapper's name is escaping me, but it's the exact same charge. And then he's also charged with administering meth to 3 of the victims so far. On the state side, Ed Buck has only been charged in what are they calling, running a drug house. and a couple of other drug charges that would have amounted to like 5 years in state prison, if that. And in California, 5 years could easily be 5 days or 5 weeks. So we're really happy about that, but we're still working this case. I mean, there are every week there are new victims. There are victims that we're still trying to get in touch with that, we need to talk to the authorities. We're trying to work as closely as we can with the feds to make sure that they can make their case. Because as you know, just because you get arrested and charged doesn't mean that you get convicted. Right. And when Ed Buck was initially arrested, they gave him a $4 million bail. He had $4 million. Wow. If the feds hadn't stepped in and took him and gave him no bail, Ed Buck would have been on the streets free.
And so I think you were talking about Mac Miller there, the rapper, that's the name you couldn't think of. But also, I want to go back to Jackie Lacey, because have you gotten any answers as far as why it took so long? Why exactly were her hands tied? There has to be, those questions are everywhere, right?
Look, I'll tell you, I met with Jackie Lacey one-on-one this past summer to explain to her how serious and how important this case was. I don't think at the time she took me very seriously. I think she takes me extremely seriously now that she's seen the fallout and what has happened. But what we did learn last week was that and we learned this directly from Jackie Lacey, was that one of the reasons why Ed Buck was never charged in Jamel Moore's death was because apparently, as she said, the detectives who arrived on the scene were not homicide detectives. They were just they were deputies from the local West Hollywood station. They found the meth in Ed Buck's notorious red toolbox. And apparently they didn't have a warrant for that. And they weren't supposed to go in there. And they were told by a coroner's investigator, if you believe that they had permission to go into it, and they actually didn't legally. So that knocked out all of that evidence. So that's what she's blaming now as the reason why Ed Buck was never charged in Jamel Moore's death. And what we've said all along and will continue to say is that had he been charged then, Timothy Dean would still be alive today. Because there's a solid chance that he would have been convicted and he would have been in prison, and he would not have been around for Timothy Dean to OD on meth in his apartment in January of this year.
There's something else I wanted to ask, because I've read a lot. Is there like an I guess alleged history of racism with Ed Buck?
Yes. Long alleged history of racism that dates all the way back to his Republican days in Arizona. So before he moved to California and became a Democrat in West Hollywood, he was a Republican in Phoenix, Arizona. And one of the most interesting stories I found about his racism in Phoenix was that he called the Black police chief there a baboon. And it made the LA Times here. And this was like back in I would say like the 80s.
Okay.
So, this, when you talk about a long history, this was like back in 1987. We found current meaning within the last few years, Facebook posts of different things that he said. But most importantly, the victims, the survivors who did not die, another common thread in all of their stories was that a part of the deal with them, getting any money from Ed Buck meant that Ed Buck could call them the N-word and other names that he got off on calling them.
Jasmyne, what's next? Because I know right now Ed Buck is being held without bail in federal holding, and he's got, I guess, those smaller but similar state charges pending. I heard some talk of civil lawsuits as well. What's next at this point?
So here's where we are now.
Okay.
Ed Buck's currently in federal jail. His trial will not be until August 2020. He will not be out of jail. He will stay in jail until his trial. There is a current civil suit filed on behalf of the estate of Jamel Moore that is currently working its way through the civil court system here in California. And we expect to file a civil lawsuit on behalf of the Timothy Dean family very soon as well. So he'll be dealing with those two. The state case is basically put on hold for the federal case right now, right? Because feds trump state. So the state case is just there in the wings. If they need to use it, they'll do it. But we're hoping for a conviction in the federal case. And just in terms of the community and the families, look, like I said, it's a long road to conviction. We're trying to make sure that, all of the victims and everyone involved, talks to the authorities and to the prosecutors, and that we're actually able to see this case all the way through to fruition. We still have a very long ways to go. And for most of us working on this, next steps are making sure that District Attorney Jackie Lacey is not reelected in March 2020 here in Los Angeles County.
Jasmyne Cannick, journalist and activist here on the Young Turks this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. And I definitely want to have you back as we follow along with this.
Thank you so much for having me, Brooke.
Like what you see? Click the subscribe button below and don't forget to ring the bell to never miss another video from the Young Turks.